Hello, everyone. Happy Monday to you all. Yes, an unusual live stream day for us. We usually do it on Wednesdays, but very happy to be joined today by Hussien, who has been a professional developer for over 10 years, currently working at Shopify. Also a bootcamp mentor, and as you can probably guess from that, very passionate about helping people get into tech. So what we're going to do today is have a bit of a Q&A session with Hussien, who, as a hiring manager, has interviewed hundreds of developers and recently participated in a grueling 100+ hours of technical interviews himself. So pretty perfectly placed to provide us with details about how to get hired. We're going to be talking CVs, resumes, LinkedIn profiles, portfolios and projects, finding jobs to apply for, interview prep, types of interviews, networking and follow-up, and assessing your job offers when you do get them. Plus, some people have already taken me up on the offer of leaving some questions in the chat, because the whole reason we do these things live is so you have a chance to ask the things you want to know. But before we do anything, I would like to extend a huge warm welcome to Hussien. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Leanne. I appreciate it and happy to help.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing all your advice on how people can get hired. But would you like to start by telling us a bit about your background and what interests you in helping people to break into tech?
Yeah, so a lot of it is because of my background. I struggled a lot to get to where I am today. I went through like a traditional, like not in the software engineering, but electrical engineering program in university. What happened was that I thought there would be no programming courses, but the university has like a joint program between computer and electrical. So I was forced to take them, didn't do very well, had to kind of rethink what and how to learn programming because it was very different than like math or physics, which I was good at coming into university. So I had to really learn it and make sure that my motivation was not to fail school. And eventually, what happened was in my third year, I realized that the internships came out between our third and fourth year. We get to do like a year and a bit of internship. And out of all the engineerings combined, like mechanical, civil, electrical, everything, computer engineering jobs had like 70 or 80% of the available internships. So I thought to myself, okay, well, I need to focus on computer then. And that's kind of how I went through the interview process. Somehow, luckily, got a job at IBM. I say luckily because I interviewed for a few positions. Eventually, what happened was somebody accepted, got selected for the position I got, but they went for something better somewhere else. So they're like, oh, Hussein's second best, let's get him on. And I said, yeah, I'll take it, whatever it is. So then when I graduated, I kind of still struggled to kind of grasp web development. And a lot of it is because, IBM wasn't very like web development focused. It was like we were building an IDE similar to like VS Code. IBM has its own version that they were promoting. So basically, I struggled a lot. Even when I first kind of joined a startup, I wasn't the best. I was on like a performance improvement plan that I had to get out of. And I really had to push and struggle. And to I really lacked like mentorship. Like a lot of like nobody really showed me a clear path forward. Like I didn't know how it looked like. I was just living day to day, surviving, trying to understand just enough not to get fired. So getting out of like panic, anxiety mode, if many years later, having a career that, is fairly successful, been at it 10 years now, I kind of realized like some people need the help. I have the years of experience. Let's start providing some help for people. Because what seems basic to you, like extremely basic after many years, is not to most people that are starting out. So a lot of it just ends up being answering basic questions. So that's where I got into bootcamp mentorship. I got into a few other junior development kind of opportunities, hang around Twitter, started my own kind of stuff here, built my own course about stuff that can help beginners. And yeah, that's how I started off. So I know it's a bit long, but I thought the context is important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's really, well, part of what you said. resonated with me about having difficulties in your first job or internship, which brings me nicely onto this question from Anupam, who says, recently started as a junior dev, but I'm not able to complete the work in time, and the work is always 40% of stuff which I don't know. How to solve that? Struggling a lot. Now, this stream is really about how to find that first job, but I think we should touch on this question because a lot of people, I think, assume you get the first dev job and that's it. You've broken into tech, woohoo. And I know for me, it didn't work out like that. And it sounds like you've had your struggles, as is Anupam. Do you have any advice for anyone who's in a situation where they're finding things a bit difficult when they have got that first job or internship?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And I mentioned this on the podcast before with Alex, that there's like 3 phases. First phase is learning, which everybody's doing at Scrimba. And then second phase, you look for the job, which is just as hard as the first phase. Some people don't realize that. And then third phase is you get that job and now you have to keep it because, you know, you're terrified. You're in a new kind of environment. It's almost nothing like the learning phase where, you know, you have that foundation, but now you're in the working world, you know, and I call it software meets people meets business. Now you're building in a business, you have software, there's clients there, you're working in a team, there's politics, there's everything. There's a million, not a million, but there's a lot of variables into getting your software done. And this is where the difficulty comes from. And that's why what's mentioned there, 40% stuff, which I don't know, that's the art. That's what I've spent years trying to perfect. And that comes from, it's a big problem in the industry about us meeting our deadlines and understanding the amount of work that we have. So when I get a feature, when I was first starting out, it's about doing that feature, trying to understand as much as possible and getting it done. Now, when I get the feature and I'm trying to understand before I even start coding is, what is this feature about? Why is it important to the business? How does it fit into the current system? Who knows the most about it? Why do we need to do it? What is the best way to approach it? Do I need to discuss it with people? There's a lot of questions that are essentially the first step before you start writing a line of code. That 40%, which you don't know, you have to decrease that as much as possible before you start. That is really something that takes a lot of time to figure out. You know, so for me, I ask questions. I always ask as many questions as possible because that 40% could double the time, triple the time, quadruple the time. You don't know. You don't want to find that out. The later you find that out, the more, not catastrophic it could be, but the more difficult it is to get things out on time. And that's why I find things get delayed because of unknowns. So when I tell you an estimate about something, if you tell me to make a button with some text, I clearly know what that button involves. But if you tell me, make a button, Hussien, that when it's clicked, it updates this kind of record. But okay, now we're updating something. Now we're hitting the database. Do I know how to hit the database? Is there an API I need to adjust? Is there a caching mechanism? Is it going to slow things down? What's the infrastructure like? What are the results and side effects of this update? Right? How do you want it to look like in the UI? So you see, like, you just asked me to do one extra thing, which is to update something. But I had to ask all these questions that are relevant because if the API doesn't exist, then you have to create the API. If it's just an adjustment on the API, that's easy. Now, it's the infrastructure. Can it hold it? Is the database record available? All this stuff adds more and more work. So that 40% starts to become more known and now more tangible. You can break it down more. When people say break things down, this is how you break things down. You try to make unknowns into knowns, and you do that by asking questions. I hope that's clear.
Very helpful, yeah. And by identifying what it is you don't know, well, firstly, that does 2 things. You know what you need to find out, because not knowing what you don't know is going to take a lot longer than at least having an idea of what you're researching. And it's going to identify what you do already know, which is going to make you feel better and also allow you to make a head start on the things that you don't have a problem with or you're not roadblocked with. So at least when your manager or whatever comes around and says, so what have you been up to? You can say, oh, I've done this, this, and this. I've just got some questions on this, rather than being this blind panic of not knowing what to do. So yeah, very nice advice. Thank you for that.
The last thing I'll mention about that, Leanne, is don't worry about not completing stuff on time as much. I haven't seen I have met very few developers that can complete things on time within kind of like working hours, so to say, like across many organizations. It is a struggle because of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned your podcast, which you did with my colleague Alex recently. Here it is. If you would like to listen, find out a bit more about what Alex and Hussien discussed, here's the link coming into the chat. So yeah, hope you get to check that out after this stream. Interesting. Wakas says, what Hussien said is exactly what I'm currently experiencing. I'm a civil engineering student and the same thing is happening to me. So I started with programming. So it seems like could be quite a common thing when people get into another type of engineering and think, oh, computers is where it's at. So best of luck to you, Wakas, on your journey. Going back to some questions from the chat now. Being asked about, as front-end developers, how much should we know about data structures, algorithms, and big O notation? Any thoughts on that, either from a hiring manager point of view or from the technical interviews you've done recently?
Yeah, great question. I think that for front-end developers, it really is two things that you got to keep in mind. Are you doing interviews or are you on the job? There's two different answers for that question. One problem with the industry, and it's a problem of we are still trying to figure out, and we're getting better as it as a whole, about how to interview developers. It's not easy. You know, because of that, what you do on the job could be very different than what you get asked in an interview, right? And it depends on organizations. Like I work at Shopify, we do not ask like kind of like Google type questions, right? I feel like they're more geared towards things that are more practical that you would, do, right? So, and a lot of other organizations, I think, have followed that. And I think that particularly in front-end interviews, I found that even big companies, like I interviewed at Uber as well, they avoided data structures and algorithms. Whereas if you said you're a back-end developer, they would ask you those questions. So I was very rarely asked those questions, but I did apply to both front-end and back-end. I consider myself full stack there, even though front-end is more a specialty for me. So in an interview process, you could potentially expect it. I'm seeing it less and less from the interview perspective. It doesn't hurt to prepare. However, I will tell you from the 100 hours of interviews I did, I probably spent 80% of my time preparing data structures. And most of my interviews didn't address data structures. And when they did, I didn't do very well at them because I had a few weeks to study for it. But the ones that asked me more practical questions, like build something in React, I found that very easy because like I already do that day to day. I've been doing it for many years, and React specifically 7 years. So very easy for me to come and do that and to think through problems. So it's kind of like I found that it wasn't as useful, but if I did apply to very big tech companies like Google, Amazon, and those kind of type, I could expect that we'll be asked those questions. The problem is they have a lot of candidates and they can afford to filter out a lot of people by making you study. I remember the Facebook panel that was supposed to prepare you for the interview for the tech screen. They came out and said a lot of Facebook engineers that they spent months prepping, like weekends and nights. Like they said, months. And I thought that was, kind of overwhelming. Like, I just have to spend all this time that maybe I might get a job at Meta and maybe I be a part of those layoffs that were recent. So it's kind of like, is it worth the reward? For some people it is. I mean, you do get paid a lot of money. And if you had stayed there for a few years on your resume, you could certainly say it's worth it. For me, not really. So I will still try them just because I feel like, I'll give it another try, but you got to think about, if it's worth it or not for you. In the real world, when you're working, I find myself not using data structures and algorithms at all, not even big notation. So it's good to know these kind of things. And a lot of that stuff is happening in the background. Like, for example, I think I gave an example even in the podcast about database indexing. When you index a database, what does that mean? You can either, if you have 1 billion rows in your database, and you go through each row one by one to find something, it's inefficient. So an index is kind of like an index of a book where it tells you in advance where you might find something, maybe a range like page 50 to 55, instead of going through all the way page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until you find that page. So with that kind of thing, there's big O notation behind it. But as a developer, a lot of times the tools take care of it for you. So it's good to know, and you're probably using it somehow. But I mean, do I have to think about it in a way in an interview where everything I'm doing, I'm like, what is the big O notation of this thing? Generally not. You just avoid certain things. Like, there's certain practices you avoid. For me, for example, nested for loops, I try to avoid them, like calling a for loop within a for loop within a for loop. Like, that can be very bad. Although sometimes if you're looping through 10 things, it's not that bad. If you're looping through 100 things, it's not that bad. What you don't want to do, for example, is loop through a lot of things and do like a double for loop. And inside the second for loop, you make a side effect, like a database call or a network call. So that can be where you come into problems. So those are just basically, like, I don't need to know the details of big O notation for that, but I just know that if I have to go through and loop through things, and every single time I hit a loop, I have to wait maybe up to 5 seconds or 2 seconds, I know things are going to get out of hand. So what I'm trying to say is that it's useful to know them, but what ends up happening is you end up following best practices that are based on them, but you don't need to know the exact details. Like, you don't need to think, well, now it's nlogin, right? Well, now I need to use a breadth first search, depth first search. No, you'd be like, well, now I need to use Elasticsearch, which is a tool that allows me to make my search faster. I don't need to know the insides and outs of it, unless maybe you do get into that eventually. So in 10 years, I haven't had to really go into that much detail into those things, to be honest. But sometimes I have, and I'll just read up on it when I have to, but it doesn't come up day to day.
Good to know. I hope that answers your question, guy named EJ. And good luck with looking for a job. Yeah. Speaking of applying for jobs, Leo has a question on the topic of when to start doing it. Should a 17-year-old apply already for web dev jobs, or gain more experience and knowledge before trying to find that first tech job? Interesting.
Yeah, I think this is a question that comes up a lot. And I think generally the recommendation I see and I agree with is that you should definitely apply, when you, have a certain project that you can showcase. So a project, there's a lot of ways you can build a project. I mean, you could say something like a simple kind of to-do list that you follow a tutorial online. It could be a project, right? But the thing is it good enough of a project to kind of attract potential employers? So what do I mean by this? When I'm applying for jobs right now, I'm a senior developer. I'll just be like, hey, look at my resume, look at my years of experience, call me about it and interview me, give me your hardest questions, and let's see if I pass. That's basically my approach. Interviews aren't a problem for me. When you're first starting out, interviews are going to be a problem for you because you don't have experience. So what's the next best thing to show a potential employer? It has to be something like, you can say it's my school. Some people care about that. A lot of people don't. Or you can be like, here are the projects I've built. So you can show them 1 or 2 projects that you can have highlighted in your resume, or you can send it to them directly in your portfolio, or just the links to them on GitHub. And you say, this is my project. And this project, some people think it has to be, some people think like something simple is good enough, or something really complex is good enough. Meaning that, like, people think like, oh, I have to build something similar to Twitter exactly to be even considered. Or some people are like, well, tic-tac-toe game should be good enough. I think somewhere in the middle is definitely what you're looking for. If you can have a project that could potentially just show you understand the fundamentals, meaning what? So let's take an example of something a student of mine in a bootcamp recently did. So he has a friend who's a basketball coach, and he wants people to sign up for an event every week where he coaches people. So he wants to know in advance how many people signed up, or how many people can sign up. And they have a limit, like 15. And then he wants to collect payment before. So he needs to kind of have a page to show this event, show how many people are on the page, how many people have applied to be there, make sure they paid, and so that they can show up at a certain time. Show them on a map where it is, maybe send a reminder. This is a project that he built. So what he's displaying here is you need to log in. There needs to be some kind of dashboard for the person to post the event. there needs to be some kind of way to accept payment. Usually use Stripe. So that is a very good project. It could be, I have another student who's working on something a little simpler. So what they're doing is there's a website, you log in, you search for recipes, you hit an API. This API gives you back, you put in the ingredients, you get back a list of recipes. They display these recipes and you have the ability to save them and favorite them, right? Very, kind of that's it. So simple enough, but what does it show? You know how to do a login, logout system. You can show them some UI you're using an API, a third-party API, your ability to save things on the database using favorites. So, and you've deployed it somewhere, for example, they had it on Heroku, but I guess now they're moving it because the free tier is almost over, but it's showcasing a few rounds of skills. That is a project that anyone can do when you learn development. If you have a project like this, I could say that you can start applying, right? So think about something that you could, if you're only a front-end developer, sure, maybe you can avoid the back-end parts and focus on something more front-end. But I like to see like a full stack project. Even if they just know the basics about back-end, a little bit about front-end, I just want to see that you know the fundamentals. And a project like that shows me it. So you're never going to be ready to apply, but you can make a project that's good enough to apply. And that's what I recommend.
Lovely. Totally. I had a question along the lines of the type of project which can help your portfolio to stand out. And you mentioned some there that your bootcamp students are making, the basketball sign up, and they're quite customized, which personally I think is a good thing compared to the tic-tac-toes and the Twitter clones of this world. Would you agree with that and say, yeah, you should make something a little bit unique, or is it safer to go with the more well-known portfolio projects?
I think that, you need to have something. And the project I described take a lot of time and you need to think about them for a while. I would say if you're desperate for projects, I don't think having a Twitter clone or something like that is necessarily bad. I think it's just a good way to kind of like follow a tutorial, have it built. Don't say it's from a tutorial, say you did it yourself. You don't need to be exact details. If they do ask you, tell them it was from a tutorial, but you don't need to advertise it is my point. So you have the Twitter clone and it's something there that you could definitely say like, you did build it. Even following a tutorial step by step still involves some kind of process of learning because the tutorials don't cover everything. So I would say there is a lot of learning from that. And even if I saw a Twitter clone and I would interview you, I would still ask a lot of questions to make sure that you understand what you actually built. And that's what I'll base your performance on, right? So but it does give me something at least to go on. So if you have nothing, definitely the clones are not a bad idea, right? And there's a lot of tutorials that can help you get started with those. But the unique projects, they're a little more complex because you need to think about them. So how do you think about these? I would say the number one thing that you should think about is how can you solve a problem in your own life? So I'll give you an example of something I built. So it's kind of like mostly done, but I just did it because I was bored in the pandemic. There's a grocery store downstairs in my building. They have a receipt which shows a survey code, just a bunch of letters. So if you complete the survey, you have a chance to win $1,000 in free groceries. I went to complete the survey. It was agony. I had to type this thing in letter by letter. There was like 20 characters. So annoying. And then the survey was like 400 questions, it seemed like just like, come on. So I thought to myself, I can make an app. I want to learn React Native. Let me just make an app where I take a picture, use Google's free OCR, character recognition, to extract the survey number. Take this, look at their API for the survey, submit fake answers, just randomize answers for all the questions. So, take a picture, take that code, send it as part of the request, done. So it took me a few hours, but I managed to get it done. I don't really use that app or anything like that, but look at how it solved the problem in my own life, right? Even if it was like not a real problem, but it was interesting. Now, instead of spending, 5 minutes or 10 minutes to put in that survey, I can do it in seconds, even though you could argue it took me 20 hours to build this thing. But now I could give it to my friends. I can give it to my friends and family. They could apply. And then this app can be built upon. They have like a person limit per month, so I can build that. I can build like, different profiles so I can submit it under different names, for example. But there's a long way I could go with it. I learned some React Native development. I learned about Google, character recognition. But you see, like, this thing kind of just came to me. And maybe it's different for beginners because you might not think about this as much, or you might not think about how your problems translate into software. Or you might sometimes overcommit. You think you could do something so crazy or so like involved, and you might not be able to pass it. What I recommend is choose like a small kind of problem, right? Think about what you might be able to solve in the smallest amount of code or features as possible. Okay. I could give another example. I don't want to take up too much time, but I think that was a clear example of like an app that could solve a problem in your life. That's the best thing. If you can showcase that to somebody, like the person who built the basketball app, he's going to have real users. People are going to actually use this and they're going to complain, and he's going to have to solve those problems. When I see that on a resume, it's like, I want this person because they have practical experience, right? So if you can get people to use this app other than you, then now you're getting into real software development, because apps are used by people break them, and you have to learn how to build resilient apps. When you're building it just for yourself, nothing's, not like only you can break it or somebody, your family member. So that's kind of like my comment on that. And those are the two different things that you could do.
I like that. And solving a problem that you have is going to make it much easier to talk about the app in an interview, because it's like, yeah, I made this thing and it made my life so much easier. So yeah, hope that helps you with some code portfolio inspiration. Codery. Adele is wondering, what makes a software developer ready to apply for his or her first developer job? Is it a good portfolio, certificates, good GitHub profile, maybe something else? Now, I did hear you mention a little bit earlier, Hussien, that you're never going to be ready. And I think that's a sentiment that a lot of people can relate to, that you aren't necessarily going to reach this point where you're like, right, yes, totally ready. But how can you know when you've got at least the basics down to make a decent application?
I would say what should inform you is your portfolio project. If you can build something similar to what I mentioned, and then there's a free bootcamp I think called 100 Devs that's very popular on Twitter. I think they call it the 100-hour project. So spending 100 hours building something like this, that could, I think, be your portfolio project. If you have something like this, I think you're ready. I've seen people who were just a few months out of their bootcamp get a job, right? So they didn't have the certificate, but they had like a starter project. They made connections and they invested in like meeting a lot of developers every week, like through Twitter or whatever. So they made some connections. They had like a simple project. They got interviews through those connections, and then they got jobs before they completed everything. And then I know people who completed their bootcamp. It's been 6 months, it's been a year, and they still haven't gotten a job, right? So they are ready to apply. Their portfolio project is there, but they don't know how to like promote it properly. They don't have it deployed. The GitHub doesn't look as good, right? Like the README is like very simple. Like it doesn't, there's a bit of, I guess, for lack of a better term, showmanship to show, right? Like about your project, like have it on GitHub, how you show yourself on GitHub, your LinkedIn profile, all those things come together to kind of show that, I have a solid project. I am a software developer. Come see this. The certificates can be good, but how are you going to stand out when there's all these other people that are completed boot camps just like you, right? And but so I think the project is what's going to make you stand out. Again, you'll never be ready. You'll just have to at some point say, my project is good enough. I'm going to start applying with it. And in the comment on readiness, I like to tell people, I'm not very political, but I'll be like, I know, Donald Trump became the president of the United States. Was this man probably perfect for the job? Some people might say yes. I like to think no, very underqualified, but he got the job. So you're just applying for a software job. Just go for it. They're never going to be prepared. You know what I mean? So if he got that job, you can get that job.
Totally. Just go for it. Words to live by there. Brilliant. Darian has a question about front-end versus back-end. I know, Hussien, you mentioned you've applied for both sides of things and full stack. Darian's finding it difficult to grasp Java in college. Do you think it would be worthwhile to learn front-end development, see if that works out instead?
I think that you should spend more time trying to grasp the Java in college now that you're like actually like you're in the process of learning it. I think it's a good idea to keep on that path. For the front end, I think it's more of an interest because the difference between the back end and the front end is that in the front end, you get to see the thing appear in front of you. And that's why they teach kind of front end in the beginning. I think a good thing is like to see the results of what you're doing. When I first started off in university, I was doing like C++, and it's just kind of like, I didn't understand what was going on. It's like this terminal thing, and it's showing me weird errors. And even when it works, it just says, yeah, it works. And just like, okay, like I didn't really see anything come up on a screen, and it was like less motivating. So front end could be very motivating in that sense. And it could be that like connector, because of the back end, like a lot of times when I did back end in the beginning of my career, I would work so hard on it. And when it comes to demo these things, people are not that impressed. But when the person comes in the front end and builds it and shows the cool UI that maybe doesn't have as hard logic sometimes, people are like, wow, amazing. Look at that. Look at what they built. But I was like, I built all the back end behind it. You know, it was so complicated, but nobody sees that. The other developers, though, they understood, but not the non-developers. So that's kind of sometimes in the front end what you get to see, even though the front end can get very, very, very complicated, to be honest. But, you know, it's something to explore, I think, on the side, in addition to doubling down still and understanding Java very well, because Java is going nowhere. A lot of jobs use Java. If you have the opportunity and you're already in school for it, keep going with it. Use it to build your projects. Like if you're building a project, for example, you could use Java with Spring, which is a framework like similar to, you know, Python has Flask or Django, Ruby has Rails, and I think Sinatra, PHP has Laravel, and I think some other ones. So this is an example of a framework Spring with Java. So you can use that to build your backend. And on the front end, you can learn at the same time and whatever you want, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or React, Vue, whatever, you know, and then you can combine it into a project. And that way you can learn more practically. So it's going to be harder, but as you struggle with this project and as you know, try to save something in a database and it takes you days, that's how you're going to learn it. And you're going to grasp the concepts, you know, because you have to. And just like with the React Native project I said with my phone and the grocery app, I didn't know a lot of what I needed to do, but I just had to, because like I knew the end result and I just like had to figure out what I did on the way to get there. If I just said I'm learning React Native, it's a little harder to motivate myself that way. I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do a tutorial, right? So, and that's another thing that I do that I didn't mention is like, before I did that, I took a tutorial on Udemy. I found the shortest course, like 3 hours, that built a project. So I went through step by step, followed that project in the least amount of time possible. So it still took me like 6 hours to do that 3 hour thing. And then I was like more ready, as opposed to say, like if I did Java, I'd be like, okay, well, let me take a 50-hour intro to Java course. Like first of all, I'm not going to do that. Second of all, it's going to be probably boring. And at the end, I might not even have a project. So that's why I look at project-based learning as a better way to do this. And that could be the reason why you're not grasping it as much, is maybe you're not building something as practical or something that you care about.
Speaking of project-based learning, that's how we teach on Scrimba. Yeah, it's as if we planned that little plug, but we actually didn't. Yes, we have our front-end developer career path, and we like to build things, teach things exactly as Hussien just recommended, through projects, because it makes it more interesting and it sticks in your mind better. But I like this idea of getting the basics down via a project-based tutorial and then going on to build your own project, because that is going to take your learning onto the even higher level. So yeah, great advice there. Natalie wants to talk resumes, also known as CVs. So as a hiring manager, you presumably have seen quite a few of these. How can we make our CV or resume stand out? And what are the essential components of a good tech resume?
I think that, yeah, it's a good question. I definitely, you know, have talked about this a lot because it's a very important point. So one thing that I've seen, like when we had a senior posting, not on Shopify, when we were at a startup, I would get like, there weren't like recruiters in the beginning, like internal recruiters in the company to help me go through the resumes. So what would happen is we post like a senior position, we get like 5 people apply. And you're like, okay, when we post a junior position, we got like 300 people apply. So how am I supposed to look through, as a human, 300 resumes? if it took me 5 minutes to go through every single one, I'm not even going to do my job because I'm still a manager. I'm not just hiring. Like I'm hiring, I'm committing to a project. I'm improving the developers in my company. I'm hiring for other positions. I can't look through 300. It's impossible. Like, I don't know what anybody says. Maybe when we had a recruiter, they would help because that was more part of their job. So I had to look at things that stood out more. So I'd kind of wade through the resumes and could just kind of see what stood out to me more and kind of like have the top resumes that stood out maybe in those first 100, because it's just too much to go through all of those. And I wish I could have, and maybe people missed out the opportunity, but that's the reality maybe in a startup world. And that's why a lot of big companies have like automatic screens that like online, they do it for you. And you never know if they look through every resume or not. I just don't understand how, if you get 5,000 resumes, a human can look through those. So my point is, how do you stand out? The people that stood out the most to me in those situations was somehow they found me on LinkedIn. They went on LinkedIn, they found me, somehow saw my title for that company and messaged me being like, hey Hussien, I applied to the company. Hope you can take a look at my resume. Here's a project I've built. Some people somehow found my email, my work email. I don't know how they did that. But what it got me thinking, first of all, I noticed them more. I thought about them more. They were in my head more. I was impressed a little bit. And the second thing was like, I'm like, this person is resourceful. They found my email. I don't know how they did it. They probably used a service. Somehow they figured it out. But, they're so resourceful. What if when I hire them, they're that resourceful as well? Like when I give them things that they don't know, they're going to use that same motivation, that same way of being resourceful to figure out answers to their problems. So that's one way of standing out. So that's another thing that you can do, especially when applying to smaller companies, like under 500 people, I would say. They're not as rigorous in their HR process. And even if they are, you can still kind of try to find a person on LinkedIn. When you connect with them, you can add a note. And this note gives you 300 characters, because you can't just send anyone a message. You have to get like LinkedIn Premium, but you can do that. You can add a note, you have 300 characters. You have 300 characters to sell yourself. Talk about who you are very quickly, post a link to your project. Now you're in their mind. They're thinking about you. Maybe they're talking about you. Like, oh, did you see what this developer did? He or she, they sent me a question, or they sent me like their portfolio. Like now like, oh, let's look this person up on LinkedIn. That's pretty cool that they did that. Or like, oh, like that's weird that they did that, but they're thinking about you. Now you're in there. So that's a way to stand out. I think that really people have done for me personally, because senior developers, you got to pry them off from their job that they already have. Junior developers, is a lot of competition.
What kind of thing can you say in this connecting message? Sort of like a generic hello, or yeah, how do you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good question. I mean, 300 characters is not a lot of space, and something that I tell people that you can do is say who you are, say a brief like 2-second pitch about who you are. Like if you were to say like, hey, like I can think of some people, like I'm a teacher transitioning into the software industry. I'm a carpenter, like these are students I have. Like I'm a music teacher who is transitioning to the software industry. I've done a lot of learning by myself or through courses, and I've built this project. Or I'm a student who is learning, or a software developer who's transitioning from this to this. I saw your posting and I'm interested in applying to this position. Here's a link to my project I built. I hope you can consider me. Now, I don't know if that'll fit in 300. Sometimes you can, depending on your link as well, maybe you might want to shorten it using like bit.ly or something like that, because that link could take up a lot of space. Could be your portfolio if you have it. Portfolios aren't that big of a deal for me. I would use a template even, because what matters is the quality of the projects, not the how nice the portfolio looks. But yeah, those are some things that I would consider in that message. Saying just hi, how are you, or please let's connect. That's not good enough, right? Like when people message me on Twitter, I never respond to somebody who just says hi, because I'm just like you're making me work. I go, hey, how are you? What's going on? Like, just tell me what you want in the beginning, right? And that's the easiest way for me to answer your question, right? And I guess some people just don't know that, they're shy, but I don't have all the time in the world to come to you and say that. So think about a hiring manager. They don't have all the time in the world to be like, oh, they messaged me, let's go and message them back. Just be succinct and tell them what you offer. What you offer, you're interested in, this is who I am, this is what I'm interested in, and this is what I built. That's my value that I can bring to your organization. Because you got to think about what can you do for them. And that's the most important thing that people think about when they consider you for a position. What do you bring to the table?
I think that's so important as well, because in face-to-face interaction, particularly with people you don't know, you wouldn't just walk up to them and say, "Hi, my name's Leanne, and here's my portfolio, and I've solved this problem with my latest project," because they think you're a little bit off the wall. But when it comes to online interaction, especially via LinkedIn and things, that is the most efficient and actually, in a way, the friendliest thing to do, because, as you said, it's not making them work. It's just saying, "Hello, here's my value. Check it out. Have a nice day." So yes, bear that in mind when you send that message. I hope that helps. On the topic of standing out. Speaking of standing out, Valtieri says on the topic of building projects, "I like to think that making a unique, sometimes silly, but deeply personal project is a way to make yourself stand out and also tell something about you and your personality." What's your take on this? I like this as an idea. Would it work from a hiring manager's perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Like, say we're in the finance industry and you build something that you just really care about stocks, like you're a big stocks nerd, and you build something and just to help you analyze things from 5 different stock networks, and they come in, like, obviously you see what I don't know what I'm talking about, but as an example, you would do that. And to the person in the finance industry, they'd be like, "Oh, cool. Like, maybe it's even the wrong way to solve it, but I just think it's cool that you did that and you tried to solve your own problem in that space that the company is in." So sometimes they line up, which could be pretty cool, right? Like, for example, you're applying to Notion and maybe you've built your own to-do list in a particular way that integrates in the way that you want. Like, you still have a to-do list, but you've built it so that it integrates with some calendars that you have and maybe send you notifications in a particular way. So you've taken something in that particular industry and you've made it your own to fit your own kind of way of doing it. So I do think it says a lot. There is this funny anecdote about it's only online. We don't know if it's true, but this like very funny developer who automated a lot of the stuff that he was doing at his company. So one thing that he would do is, if he didn't log in by a certain time on his computer, he had an automatic sender of emails that would just send a message to his boss with like a list of excuses, and it would pick one. If he didn't log out by 5, it would do the same for his wife. It would just pick a list of excuses, be like, "I'm going to be late, hun, because of this." Some guy used to break the database a lot and needed his help, and used to message him saying, "Sorry, blah, blah, blah." He had an automated message. If this person ever messaged them, it would send the same thing. And he had a script to fix the database. The last thing that he did was the coffee machine. He SSH'd into it, and it would make him coffee by a certain time every day. And you just have the cup, and it would just automatically, when he logged in, it would know that he logged in and then start making the coffee. So what I mean about that, it tells me a lot about this person's personality. I think it's kind of funny, but also maybe he's a bit of those like kind of programmers that are kind of like, but anyways, I think it speaks to that a little bit. And just a bit of a funny story that I thought I could share.
Brilliant. I like the idea of wiring up your smart house to your computer. Lovely. Let's talk mentors, because Dave Collison is here asking, who'd like to be my mentor? Woo. And Drops Family Garden says, mentors are valuable to your success. Can you tell us a bit about how you can approach finding a mentor, what a mentor actually is, and how to best use your time with a mentor?
Yeah, there's a lot of conflicting things here. Like, for me personally, when I want a mentor, I want to make sure that I offer something in return. That's just the kind of how my thinking is, because I consider everybody's time valuable. So for example, I have a personal coach that I just pay a bunch of money to make sure I do things on time. There's just random guy that yells at me every week. So he's mentoring me in that sense. Other people know, like, we're mentors internally in the company. It's part of their job to help me out every couple of weeks. In terms of like regular mentorship, like I get paid by Springboard to mentor people every week. But I also have, for example, once a week, I have a free kind of coffee chat on ADP list, and I'll share the link here. ADP List is a nice site where essentially it was born out of people in the beginning of the pandemic losing their jobs, and somebody in the UX design kind of space made a website so people can meet each other and kind of offer mentorship for free. So I offer like half an hour a week from that. And you can see here I have a bunch of reviews and stuff like that. Like I just do once a week, and that's my time commitment and what I'm available for. There are a lot of people on this site just offering their mentorship. And you don't know how much time they can give you, but this is something that you never know. Maybe some people have more time than others and they're willing to help you out. So that's one example of getting a mentor. Now you can get even more kind of like if you can pay some money. For example, there is something like mentorcruise.com, which is more like weekly check-ins, and that's something that, like, you know, if you have the budget for it, that's another like level that you can do. But ADP List is a good way to start, especially I know when you don't have a job as a beginner, money can be tight. I get it. But you know, it'll be a bit longer to find some structure. What paying money does is like it allows you to find some structure quicker. So those are the two options that you have for mentorship. I know when a lot of people ask me, can I be your mentor? Well, that's a lot of time commitment, right? So what I tell people is like, I can't take anybody right now, but if you have any questions, message me and I'll answer when I have time. That's my ability and my commitment, right? That I can offer, because I do have a full-time job. I do the part-time mentoring. I have a family, you know, I have things I want to do. So that's my commitment. But other people, it might be different. And that's what I like about this list, about ADP List, is you could go through and book sessions with people for free, and there's not a limit, and maybe you can find someone. And if you are more desperate and you need someone right now, Mentor Cruise can offer that as well.
Perfect. I hadn't heard of these two resources before, so I'm sure they'll be very useful for people looking for a mentor. Glad to hear about those. Couple of questions on the topic of which languages to learn. And the first one is from Nabil. Is Ruby/Ruby on Rails, not Wales, worth learning nowadays, or should I go for another language?
Well, like at Shopify, we're a big Rails shop. Like we do a lot of Rails. There's a lot of big companies that do Ruby on Rails, so it definitely is worth learning. But one thing, like if you want the answer to this question, just do a simple search about jobs and then see how many come up for, and then see like what comes up for them. Is it mostly Python? Is it mostly Java? Is it C#? Is it Rails? I think that you can't go wrong if you're learning Django with Python. You can't go wrong if you're learning Ruby on Rails. You can't go wrong if you're learning Java Spring. You know, and you can't go wrong if you're learning ASP.NET with C#. There's just so many jobs available for those. And Rails is definitely worth learning. The thing is with Rails, maybe there's not as many jobs, but the ones who have decided to build in Ruby on Rails, they can't get off it because it's too complicated to get off and switch languages for, like, say, an example, Shopify. So Shopify has doubled down, hired a lot of Rails contributors who are big in the industry, and they're improving. We're improving Rails and Shopify as an organization, right? So that way we can push things forward for ourselves and for others, right? So I don't think they're switching from Rails anytime soon. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it. I don't think other companies are. So if there are less opportunities, sometimes it's still good, because when you get those opportunities, you're highly sought after, as opposed to say, like, I know React very well, but a lot of people know React very well. So I have to prove that I know React better than all of them. Maybe I don't have to as much in Rails.
Yeah, that's a great point. If there are fewer job openings for a technology, when you do get into it, you've got less competition. It's worth bearing that in mind. Demetrius wants to know which programming languages I should give attention to get hired as a junior. You just gave us a little list. Can you run through that list one more time in case Demetrius or anyone else missed it?
In terms of pure languages, right, you can look at JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to build stuff on the front end. Like, that will be enough on the front end. And whether you learn frameworks, it's up to you. The most popular one is React. You don't need to know it, but knowing it will definitely be helpful because a lot of people use React. Now coming to the back end, you know, learning Python is not a bad idea. Now, if you have a framework to back it up, like in Springboard, we teach Python with Flask, which is also popular. I just don't think it's as good as Django for like a bigger projects, but knowing Python could be very good for you as well. You can't go wrong with knowing Python. I got a lot of kind of like messages about like backend and Python and things like that, although it differs. And things are changing. Like I never used to get a lot of messages about Golang, but now I get a lot more messages on Golang because people are using it a lot more, right? So those are some languages that you know, that you could know. I mean, you could never go wrong with native languages in terms of mobile. So if you want to learn mobile, like become a highly paid iOS developer, learning like Swift UI could be very valuable as well, because like that's what you have to build iOS apps in if they're native. So as opposed to say React Native or Flutter, which are different kind of platforms, but I have a friend who is very sought after because he knows the oldest language in iOS, which is Objective-C. But a lot of companies have built using Objective-C. Their apps are really old and hard to change. So he comes in, collects, rakes in the cash because he's just been doing it long enough and they need him. So general languages, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. If you have to learn a framework, learn React. Backend, Python with Flask or Django is good enough. Pick one. Flask is easier. Just make sure you know how to change a database entry. So you might need an ORM. Django already has a way to change a database, and Flask doesn't. So you have to use an additional tool like SQL Alchemy, for example. So I know I'm listing them pretty fast, but just Python, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, if you take it, are good enough.
Yes, and this will be recorded so you can watch it back later if you want to recheck the list. Yes. We talked earlier about someone who was finding the back end harder to grasp than the front end. But we also have someone who is experiencing the opposite. Or maybe they just haven't got to the back end or away from the front end things first. And that is Gio asking, are there jobs available if you're proficient in HTML and CSS and design? Oh, interesting. But don't know much about JavaScript. Basically, developing jobs mostly focused on design. What do you reckon of this, Hussien?
I don't have as much experience with this, but I did see it a lot in the kind of beginning of my career where a designer was expected to know HTML and CSS, and they would actually give us the HTML and CSS, and we would use it to build and like add our own JavaScript to manage all the events in JavaScript. So definitely is possible. Although like bigger companies these days, you have like a front-end developer who would know HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And then the designer or the UX designer, which is more proficient in design, user experience, and they would use tools like Figma, for example, and other tools to kind of like build the raw designs. So that's more common nowadays, but still on a smaller company, I could still see them still being available. I think that if you don't know much JavaScript, you just have to learn a bit more, just to have the basics enough to be able to, when somebody clicks on something, like clicks on a button, you can do something, right? So JavaScript is really hard to master. Same with CSS, to be honest. But you don't need to know much to say that you know enough JavaScript to be a front-end developer, in my opinion, because you're going to learn a lot of it on the job, right? And it took me a while to understand JavaScript. Now I love it, and I'm very like obsessed, like nerd JavaScript definitely here. But it took me a long time. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't tell the difference between like basic things, but it just took time for it to click, like a few years.
Lovely. A couple of questions here on how you might be viewed by hiring managers if you haven't taken a traditional route into tech. So we have Ailey Toa saying, I'm a college dropout, have no proper work experience, and a self-taught coder. And Mohammed is asking, does ageism exist in the tech industry? And if so, any advice on how to work around it? What would you suggest to these two people?
Regarding, I think the first one, let me see here. Yeah. If you're negatively experienced, if you were a college dropout and stuff like that, it depends on the company that you're hiring for. Some companies are snobby and they'll insist on the university degree. A lot of big companies are starting to change their way. Or have never cared about that. Like I can tell you, like Shopify hires bootcamp grads for their, like they get you in through the internship program when it's available. Again, they'll get the internship program and they'll try to get you from internship to full time that way. And they don't really care about your degree. It just depends on how you did on that initial question and to get you in the interview process. So a lot of that is changing, but some companies, yeah, they'll still be like, no, we need the degree. I think that's changing. It's not as much as it used to be like 10 years ago. Like people were very serious about the degree. It's not as much like that anymore. If you can come in with a decent project, a lot of self-learned people are getting jobs every single day, and they're doing it through having their project and making connections. Using something like ADP List, going on Twitter and asking different senior developers for coffee chats. Eventually, you'll make a connection, and you'll get an interview from that. And it will be better than any kind of degree that you had. Like I was lucky enough that I had a good degree, and then I went to IBM. So that was good for me in my resume. But if I had more connections, I would probably have gotten a way better job out of school. But I just didn't understand that yet. I was like, I hate to do this whole networking thing. It sounds boring, but it's definitely something that I do a lot now. And I think it'll benefit you. And all it takes is like just booking sessions with people every week. Focus on talking to one or two people, and it will do better than any degree that you have, that you can ever get.
Would that also help if there is an issue with ageism? Maybe there isn't. What's your take on that, Mohammed's question?
It's hard for me to tell in terms of this thing. Like I've only seen anecdotal evidence, and people have told me, yes, like they believe that because of their age, they weren't getting as many opportunities. So I don't know, like I'm not an expert on that, but if a company you feel like is giving you any signs of that, I don't think it's worth even applying to those jobs. I think generally people don't care about this. Like I was at a startup, and we had like one of my colleagues, he was older doing the same job, and we didn't care about his age. We just cared about like he passed the interview, and that's what we do for everyone. And they passed the interview, and they weren't like seemed like a mean person or anything like that. Like seemed like very nice to work with them, and he worked there for like almost 4 years. So it didn't matter in that regard. But people do complain about this, and I worry about that eventually myself in the industry. So I don't really have, I guess, I don't really have an informed take on this, unfortunately. But I have heard people say that they've experienced this, unfortunately. Ways around it, I can't say I'm the expert, but if you feel this in any company you're applying for, it's probably a sign already that you don't want to work for them. I know you're desperate when you're looking for your first job, but if it's going to be a nightmare for you, you're going to have a boss that mistreats you, it's not worth it. I don't think, at least, because I went through some psychological suffering in that case, and I guess it got me to where I am. But at the time, like I used to be in the military, and when I remember my boot camp that I did with the military, I remember it fondly now. But trust me, when I was there doing it, I do not remember. Like I know that it was basically hell. So don't put yourself through that if you don't have to.
Yes, brilliant. Well, we have reached the end of the hour. Leo really wants to know what projects Hussien built to get into Shopify. Hussien mentioned a project a little bit earlier, so you can watch the recording and find out about it. It solved one of his life problems, I'll tell you that much. If you would like to hear more from Hussien, Alex did a podcast episode with him a few months ago, last month. Yeah, so you can check that out. Oh, a quick hello to Uncomfortable Chair, who's back again. Exciting news. It's nearly time for JavaScriptmas. Yes, our annual JavaScript Advent Calendar festive event. You can drop your email right in here if you want to get an email when we go live. Yes, and once again, here's that list, ADP list, where you can find some coding mentor sessions. Well, thank you ever so much for coming, Hussien. It's been a wonderful hour filled with genuinely useful advice, which I'm sure will help many, many people. So yeah, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Leanne. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and attention. And I really hope that I was able to serve you and answer as many questions as you can. Feel free to reach out to me via DMs on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm not sure if that's shared or anything like that, but I think on the podcast, there's a few of those links. Happy to answer questions when I have time. ADP list, if you can book a session, go ahead and book a session if you find one available. And yeah, happy to help you in any way possible.
Perfect. Thanks very much. See you next time, everyone.
Yeah.